Hi friends, welcome back to Building in a Small Town. My guest today is Liesl Seabert from the UNI Institute for Decision Making. Liesl is a serial public servant with a focus on planning and economic development. In this episode, you'll learn how a Florida girl has fallen in love with all things rural Iowa, what it's like to help shape and implement multiple statewide programs simultaneously, it's as hard as it sounds, and how important leadership is, especially when it comes to rural. I really enjoyed this conversation and really appreciate Liesl's passion and enthusiasm when it comes to the wealth of possibilities in rural America. But before we get into the episode, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for listening and ask you to make sure that you're subscribed on whatever your listening platform. While you're at it, if you could also drop a quick rating and review, that's a simple, free way to support the show, and it helps others find the show as well. Thank you again, and let's get into it. Welcome to Building in a Small Town, where we're talking to entrepreneurs, community leaders, policymakers, and more to find out how they're building things in small towns. I'm your host, Shelby Smith. All right, hello and welcome back to the Building in a Small Town podcast. Today I am joined by Liesl Seabert of the UNI Institute for Decision Making, which is a relatively new role for you, previously with Iowa Economic Development, and we'll get into some more of your background, but thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So you are not from Iowa, if I...
Correct.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes. I am a Florida girl. We moved to Iowa about, I think 8 years ago now, for my husband's job. We thought it would just be for 2 years maybe, because he works for John Deere and they tend to change jobs every 2 to 3 years. And I was like, sure, why not? Never been to Iowa, but why not? And 8 years later, we are here. I think we're both on our third roles. We now have 2 kids. We're here. So I'm still pretty sure we're not considered Iowans, because I feel like that is something, unless you were born here, real Iowans don't let you claim. But we both really like it. So we're here.
Got you. So no captive Iowan bumper sticker on the back of your car, because I've seen those for people who are not Iowa natives.
Yes. I maybe did have one for the first year.
Took it off though.
And I think I got my husband the transplant because he's from Illinois. So like he for sure knew he was upgrading. I wasn't sure, but now I know I've upgraded too.
Okay. So what part of Florida did you grow up in?
Born and raised in Tampa, but I've kind of moved around a bit. I went to college in Virginia because I just wanted to get out of the state, wanted to go to a smaller school, and then came back to do grad school at Florida State University. And after that, my kind of first big girl job was working for the city of Tallahassee, which is where Florida State is, and then working for the state of Florida. I think it was when I was with the city is when I met my husband. He had a territory position with Deere, so he has worked for Deere his entire adult life. And so we met in Tallahassee, and he was very upfront about the fact that like not a lot of options in that area, in that city, so we would probably end up in the Midwest somewhere. So we kind of knew that somewhere was going to happen, but I feel like we really lucked out with being in Iowa though, because not to throw any communities on the bus, but there were 2 that he looked at jobs at that were in maybe Nebraska. And I was like, I will visit. I will not move. So we ended up here and it's been really great.
Okay. And so is your husband an engineer or is he in sales? Like what does he do with John Deere?
His current role, he does like product management is what he used to do. Currently he does, and he's going to love that I'm explaining his role on here. I call it pre-R&D. So he kind of does kind of research on other companies, technologies, things like that might partner well with Deere, to the extent of even Deere might be interested in purchasing. And then he makes a pitch to say, hey, we should be investing in this. We should be looking into it even more. That's his current role. So he's had that since 2020. And he's kind of ready for something new, because I feel like that's kind of where we're at in life, where it's every few years. Hope my current employer is not listening. Every few years, it's like, oh, I need something new and exciting. Do it for my current probably knows that. It is probably like, sure, find something new and exciting
within our department.
Within our department, which is totally possible.
Yeah. Well, and that's with a company like Deere too, it's so big. There's so many different departments, different opportunities, things like that. Mm-hmm. So did he always want to work for a job? Like, he grew up in Illinois. Did he grow up in
on a farm?
Okay.
Yep.
So that makes total sense.
Yes. His brother's the farmer. So otherwise I think Adam would have been, but his brother is 8 years older. So was kind of already established as the farmer. So Adam was like, what else can I do that's in ag? He still goes back to help with planting and harvest every year. So yes, ag is kind of his heart. He also gets to test out things. I'm sure his brother loves it when he has ideas that he wants to see if they work. So
yeah,
he's very
on-farm testing.
Yes.
It's very important, especially in ag technology and things like that. Okay, so what did you go to grad school for?
Well, I started off at law school. I did finish all of those things. But when I graduated college, there were not a whole lot of jobs out there. And I thought I wanted to be like an environmental policy lobbyist. Based on my current role, you're probably like, what the heck?
Well, you were in Virginia, so depending on where you went, that might have been like,
I loved animals. I didn't want to be a vet. I went to a small school. There weren't like all the options in the world that were talked about. It was more or less the same kind of thing. So, decided to go to law school. Very quickly knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer. So about one semester into law school, I started looking at their joint programs, and they had a joint urban and regional planning program. So you extended 1 year, and you did a joint program, which essentially saved you a year from getting the master's and law degree separately. So I got a master's in urban regional planning and law degree, which was really such a blessing because I love planning. I really, really fell in love with that kind of work. Didn't even know that was a thing. We don't talk enough about like city planners with kids. So my kids are going to hear a lot about it. But so that has been a really good, kind of started this path. I still loved the environment. So when I was in Florida, I did a lot of, like resiliency planning and coastal planning, thinking that was kind of what I wanted to go into. And then I had this like pivotal moment where I had 2 job openings. One would have more or less pigeonholed me in the water world, and the other would have been more of a kind of general planning, community development type role. And I went that way, probably because I was already dating my now husband, and I was like, ooh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep him on the coast.
Right.
Like,
I might end up landlocked.
Yes. This might not be great. And I'm really glad I did. So I kind of shifted from an environmental focus to a people focus, where I really wanted to work with people to help create communities that they just really love. So that's kind of how I got to where I am. And I've now, I'm kind of a serial public servant. So worked for the city of Tallahassee, then the state of Florida, and then had 2 different roles with the state of Iowa, and now work for the public university. So, it's working well.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to just be a public servant, and that's doing okay.
Awesome. So I, interestingly enough, also almost did the dual program thing with the law school, and I was going to go law school and MBA.
Okay.
Took my LSATs, did all of that stuff, and then got accepted into the Sport Changes Life program, which was over in Ireland. Oh. And in Ireland, they do 1 year master's. So I was like, perfect. I'll just do this 1 year master's, and then I'll come back and I'll go to law school after. I ended up in Ireland for almost 5 years. So that went off the table, but I had a second semester of senior year when I was at St. Joe's. I was actually like going in to drop this guy's class because I didn't want to take an 8:30 a.m. tax class.
Fair.
Second semester senior year. And after the season was over, I didn't need to have a specific number of credits. Like could have graduated in 3 years, like all of the things. And it was intro to tax, and he was a tax attorney. And I said, like, told him my plans essentially, and he said, don't go to law school if you don't want to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, well, I don't really want to be a lawyer. I was I was really only getting this MBA and law degree. I was like, I could do, in 4 years rather than 6 or whatever it would take if you went both back to back. And I had an academic advisor that said, you should just go get your law degree and your MBA at the same time. So then nobody can deny you for anything. Like, you're qualified for everything. And so
I really wish someone gave me that advice, because I actually had 2 roles, especially early on, where they almost didn't hire me because they were like, well, you're just so overqualified. I'm like, please hire me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be a lawyer. This isn't me applying for your position because I just didn't get a law job.
Right.
Not interested. Not to mention the debt. So
yes,
that's not fun either.
No. And that's, like I said, I look back at, how everything has panned out in my life. And I'm like, that was some of the best advice at the perfect timing for me to hear that too, of don't do it if you don't want to be a lawyer. Because that was never why I was doing it. I just was going to do it because somebody said you should do this. So, which maybe is not the greatest reason.
I mean, my grandfather's pretty much why I went to law school. He was like really gun-ho that I needed to go to law school. And since I didn't have another option, here we are. But I will say I try to not regret it, because it got me back to Florida, which is where I met my husband, which is where I started planning. So like, I kind of feel like everything had its purpose. But man, the cost is just tough.
So why was your grandfather so gung-ho?
Oh, who knows?
Okay.
I think it was very much just like be a lawyer or a doctor.
Yeah.
They're successful.
It'd be cool to have one of those in the family.
Pretty much. Check that box.
Yeah. Well, I suppose somebody's got to do it for the family.
Then he passed away right after I graduated. Like, I was studying for the Georgia bar, which is a whole different story. And it's very soon after that, I was like, so am I off the hook? Like, I don't actually have to be a lawyer now because, like, I did what Papa wanted, but he's not here to tell me I have to now actually practice law.
Right. Yeah, of course.
That wasn't part of the agreement.
No, yeah, like you said, off the hook. Okay, so you guys end up moving to Iowa because your husband gets transferred to, I assume, Ankeny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where did you guys end up settling originally?
Ankeny.
Okay.
And still, we're actually in the same house. It's funny. My very first time in Iowa was to go house hunting. And we were here in, I think it was April. And it was sleeting for like one whole day. And I was like, oh, this is amazing, fun. But then I went and hung out in Hy-Vee for a couple hours because my husband had work things. And I was like, oh, well, at least the grocery store's cool. So we're in like the Prairie Trail new development area of Ankeny. I guess it was new when we moved there, and really liked it. Our house is just across from the elementary school. And I only mention that because when we bought it, we were like, oh, this will have great resale value since we're only going to be here for 2 years. And now we're like, oh, this is great because maybe now our kids can walk across the street to go to school in a few years. So,
right.
But we've really liked it because we didn't buy it thinking we would have a family there. We are kind of thinking about moving, but we legitimately might just move within Prairie Trail because we like having things that are so walkable. So it's been a good fit for us. But at the time, I didn't have a job yet. I was just broadly applying. So we made Ankeny kind of our center, and I applied to everything from, Story County and Ames down in through Des Moines State, all the things. So it kind of gave me a good radius around his job.
Right. And Ankeny is very easily accessible. That's why it's growing so fast. It's very easily accessible to Ames, Des Moines, lots of different markets.
Yes.
It's just exploded. We do a lot of landscaping in Ankeny, as you can imagine. Ankeny and Polk City, the two of those, which basically they're the same now at this point. I don't know where one ends and the other one begins. Okay, so when you were applying for planning jobs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm actually really happy with the way things worked out. So my first job was with community development, program manager might have been my title, with the Iowa Arts Council, which was kind of a weird fit. But props to them. They had traditionally hired only people who had an arts background. And they were really wanting someone who could like speak the language of governments to help convince people who were not arts to fund the arts, essentially, to see the reasons to support it. So I had worked with the arts agency in the state of Florida. So I was like familiar with how to kind of try to merge those two, merge rural communities in Florida is who I was working with at the time, and arts organizations and actually a bunch of other organizations. So it was really kind of a cool fit. And it like opened up the whole world of where I now am. So I started there and very quickly realized I needed to like get outside of the arts lane. So traditionally, most of the Iowa Arts Council, they worked with artists and arts organizations, and that was kind of it. So in some ways, they were just preaching to the choir. So I took it upon myself to preach to everyone else. So I started showing up in random rooms, in groups and events to just be like, hey, these are the programs we have. Like, you should care about the arts. It will help, I don't know, just like strengthen the happiness seems like a silly word, but I say happiness and joy to communities a lot. And that was really kind of the piece that I was trying to sell. And because of that, I became a groupie of the Empower Iowa initiative when it kicked off in 2018. And so when I then applied for the position in 2019, they were like, oh, we know this person. She keeps showing up to meetings. And so then that was kind of led to the next thing.
Yeah. So tell me about that next thing then, the Empower Rural Iowa initiative. You said it launched, you had been, like you said, a groupie since its infancy.
Yep.
And so talk to me about that. Like from the beginning, how did it grow? What your new role ended up being?
Well, Empower Iowa was created by the governor executive order in 2018. And she created 3 task forces. I applied to be on the task force. Was not selected, hence I just had to be a groupie. Public meetings, sorry. But I was really interested in the work that they were doing, and I actually understand why I wasn't on. They focused on getting task force members from rural communities, which makes a lot more sense. So she created the 3 task forces. They were focused on housing, broadband, and leadership development. But after their first year of meeting, they realized that there were so many programs that existed out there, like either state run or otherwise available, that it was really hard for communities to know what they didn't know. So they were like, hey, we need someone who like will wake up thinking about rural and like, that's it. Like we have, rural set-asides or some rural programs, but there's not a single person that's trying to see the whole sphere of rural. So they decided to hire a position and put them in IEDA, and that was me. So when I was brought on board, July 2019, honestly, they gave me a binder of like the past agendas from the last year, and it was kind of like, and we got these 2 line items, but you need to create the admin rule for them for us to be able to use them, and otherwise, go forth. Which was kind of very cool. So the lieutenant governor has said it multiple times, and he co-chairs the initiative. So I worked very closely with him. It's like just building the plane as we fly it. Like very much, we don't know.
Very entrepreneurial.
Pretty much, yes. Like it was just kind of figuring it out. There are some things that they went back and did with me when I was still in the role last year. We were like, we should maybe do some like strategic planning. Like, what are our goals? We've been doing this now for 4 years, and we're still like almost just like reacting and filling needs as we see them, not having like a strategic plan. Which as a planner, I was like, I feel like I'm just like without a path. So it was pretty amazing though. It was just me. I ended up kind of getting adopted by the Downtown Resource Center, which is how I know that team very well. And that was mostly by proximity because they put my desk right next to them. And I was like, hi, I'm new here. Like, please be my friend. Like, where's the bathroom and how do I use the printer? So we very quickly kind of launched new grant programs, continue to have the task forces meet. For a couple years, they came out with annual recommendations, things like policy or programmatic changes to kind of address little needs. Then we had a couple years of what we called like our implementation years, where we just kind of waited to see how things were going to work, like see the impacts of the programs that we had launched out into the world. By last year, kind of the middle of last year, we had 8 or 9 active grant programs, and an annual leadership program that was going into its 4th year. We still had 3 task forces. We had a pretty robust partnership with Drake Law School and UNI Advanced Iowa, working with employee-owned cooperatives to help address business succession planning. And a few other little things that were all being done. Oh, and a new rural AmeriCorps program that was all housed under me and half of another person. So we had to have a like come to Jesus moment where I chatted with the lieutenant governor and the past chair, Sandy Ehrig. And I was like, okay, I am tapped out. Like my plate is overflowing and I can't do any more. So if we are wanting to do more, we are going to have to take something away. So we kind of launched into a whole strategic planning process, which I think is super exciting. And it ultimately ended up being a really good like end point for me, start point for someone new, because they decided to merge down to just one task force. So instead of 3, just one, because all of the challenges are so intertwined. It's hard to kind of put them in silos. Also decided that we had these really good, popular grant programs, but they didn't necessarily make sense to be housed under the Empower umbrella. They maybe should live like where someone else is doing childcare and where someone else is doing housing, where the average person would think to look for a housing program should maybe be where all the housing programs are, type of thing. So they are going to slowly start trying to offload some of these programs, and instead Empower is going to have this like innovation mentality where they are going to pilot concepts, run them for a couple years, see if they work, and if they do work, then hand them off to the agency organization that is better equipped to do it long term. We're kind of using the Iowa First Aid model. Are you familiar with that program?
Yes.
Okay.
But if you can explain it to, I am familiar with it because I just watched Adam's presentation at
that's right.
at the World Development Summit. But.
So it's really cool, but that's kind of the model that they're running with. So Iowa United First Aid came out of a visit the lieutenant governor had to Israel, a couple of years ago now, maybe 2022. What is time? And in Israel, they have United Hatzalah, and it's this group of volunteers that essentially, I think they all have beepers, and they are pinged kind of the way an Uber would be. So if there is an emergency and they're going to have challenge because of traffic to get an ambulance to the emergency, they can ping the closest volunteer, and the volunteer has a go bag, and there they have like a motor scooter to dodge and weave traffic to get to the emergency. I want to say they got their response time down to like 90 seconds or something incredible. Clearly in rural Iowa, our problem's not traffic. Our problem is space. So unfortunately, our volunteers don't get a motorbike, but they do get a go bag. So the concept here was to address the problems of distance. So we have ambulances that take a longer time to get to an emergency. That could be just purely that's their starting point, or that could be that there is one and it went to a different call and is now trying to get to a different emergency. So we have 3 pilot counties. I keep saying I'm like not out of it yet, still so in it. 3 pilot communities who were like, sure, we'll test this out. They had to find their own volunteers. We helped with go bags. We found it's actually the same company that does the app for United Hatzalah and has done it in Jersey City. Is doing it for us too, where it's could just go on your phone. You just turn it on when you're ready to be on call, and you'll get dinged, and you can. I think it maybe pings like the 3 closest, and you just say if it's going to be you or not, and respond. And you have your go bag. You get trained in basic first aid. A really big concern was the whole concept of like insurance and who these volunteers worked for. So we did a lot of looking into what the Good Samaritan law covers, and essentially like general first aid, like slightly elevated from what you would train a babysitter in, is all of these people have. But you'd be surprised at how like just knowing how to use an AED and having one can save a life.
Right.
So, or like stop the bleed. It's really just like having the tools to be able to use them. So they don't do things like administer drugs or anything like that. It's really just basic stuff. Anyway, so it launched last year. So we're kind of almost wrapping up the first year. I think they're going to do at least another year, but they're already thinking about how they can expand it. And we have been partnering might be a strong word, but we can call it partnering with Health and Human Services, the public health group, I believe. With their team, they've been kind of looped in the whole time. They've been joining meetings. They've been making sure that the program kind of meets their requirements too, with the hope that they might be interested in taking it on long term if it's successful. Because obviously myself and now the current administrator for Empower, we don't have a like emergency response background. So
No.
we're probably not the best people to be managing the program long term. But we're super nimble. So a lot of other state agencies have a lot of hoops to jump through. And just the way the money has been funneled and the leadership structure, it's been a little easier to implement quickly under the Empower umbrella. So that's why it's been kind of a cool mechanism to get some programs out pretty quickly.
Right. So you can test and, you know, like you said, it's sounds like prior to getting this focus, shall we say, it was a little bit of a shotgun approach, and it was like, here we have all of these programs that we've been doing, and like Liesl looks like she needs more to do. We're gonna put this all under her umbrella because it's so broad, and you know the issues that affect rural are so broad. Sure, just put it under this big umbrella that will cover all of it. And so what it sounds like to me is that it's a much more focused, I don't want to say project-based sort of a program, but it is. It's like you have these larger projects that you need to have these pilot studies on to see if they're effective, to see if they, you know, garner further funding and further life, if you will, which makes a lot more sense.
Yes. And they, in some ways, this has been kind of top of mind for Empower from the beginning. So of our first 2 programs that were launched back in 2020, I think we launched in May 2020 because why not? There was nothing else going on. So we launched a housing assessment program, which is partnership with ISU Extension, but we also launched the Rural Innovation Grant. So from the very beginning, we've been really interested in supporting models that can be scaled to other communities. So that was the goal of the Rural Innovation Grant, was to come up with like cool out of the box ideas that other communities could do as well. So anything from, it could be programmatic or like brick and mortar type projects. And we did see a combination of both. We saw fresh out of the box lockers, Ramsey Market. They did the fresh out of the box lockers down in like, where would that be? Southwest part of the state. They have a few communities down there. So that was one that we saw as a really kind of cool solution to food deserts. We worked with the group out of Dubuque. I think it's the Rural Ideas Network, or that's their new umbrella term, I believe. They had a kind of interesting co-working space model that was more of a hub and spoke. So they, the rural communities didn't have to kind of create it all themselves. It was a little bit more turnkey. They kind of had different options, different trainings that they could just plug into a space that was prepared for things like that, which made it a little more sustainable than some of the other rural models we had seen. So we worked with them quite a bit, and they have been growing. So things like that has been a goal of Empower for a while. And I think it makes a lot of sense that they're just now totally kind of putting their eggs in the innovation basket and moving forward with that.
Well, and that is, I think that's one of the challenges with probably any sort of planning, but rural in particular. And I think Bill said it on his episode. If you've seen one small town, you've seen one small town. Like each is unique in so many different ways. And so really hashing out, figuring out, finding out what is something that can be replicable in a town of 5,000, but that can also be replicable potentially in a community of 500.
Right.
Those ideas, they're there.
Yeah.
They sometimes take some funding, take some resources that, maybe are not possible without something like Empower.
Right.
But yes, having a much more focused approach
Yes.
is probably
Yes.
probably well welcome.
I mean, I joke about it now, and it did get to be a little ridiculous. I feel like even the leadership, like Lieutenant Governor, co-chair, but even within IEDA, every time I kind of rattled off all the programs that essentially I was managing, they were like, oh, that's a lot. I'm like, yes. And they're small. So like when you just looked at the pot that was getting put out, it didn't look that meaningful. Like our budget for the last couple of years was $700,000, and that was a big increase from the first couple of years of $400,000. But they're grants of between $1,000 and $20,000. Most of them were $10,000. And they're not necessarily people who do a lot of grants. So while we try to keep the bar pretty low, there's a lot of hand-holding. And I liked it that way. So there had been the opportunity a couple of times to kind of have someone else handle compliance. No, like there is a big difference between the Empower program compliance and the like CDBG, federal strings compliance. And there's a big difference between like the personality that I wanted at the time to be the face of Empower for quote compliance versus some of the more hard and fast rules that CDBG and other federally funded programs have to go through. So I kind of put it on myself. Like there were some opportunities to maybe offload a little bit. And I was like, I don't know. I think it's more important for us to be very make these accessible, make sure that people can feel like it's worth the effort for the funds. Because I feel like I know that there are programs out there that it's so much work to get them that it's not even worth the money that you would get. So we didn't want to do that.
Well, and it's not even necessarily that it's so much work to get them that it's not worth the money. It's that it's so much work to get them and there's so many strings attached that like we're sitting in a community of less than 500. We don't have the capacity. Like we don't have, it's just, we don't have the resources to be able to do it. Like we would do it if we can. Right. So it's really, really, and I've had this conversation with Jimmy too. It's like a delicate balance between, what we need as a tiny community, like, and what hoops you are requiring us to jump through. You'll earmark a certain amount for these size of communities, but like we aren't even a community of 5,000, like that. It's just a very different. So I applaud you for not making it scary compliance, because you are then essentially weeding out the people that you're trying to help because it's just a lack of capacity. Yes. Also understand though, like you need to have certain standards,
Well, right. And that was, cause there's now, it's essentially now a team of 2 with Empower. And when I was working with my colleague Sasha and we would kind of talk through, it was like, okay, so we want to make sure that like it, if we get audited, we're not doing anything illegal or wrong with the funding. We're not adding additional layers to it. Like we are just requiring what needs to be required to make sure that the money was spent responsibly and was used for what it was intended to be used for, like very straightforward. But asking for it in a way that is just a little bit more approachable, as approachable as you can be with Iowa grants, but we really tried to make that as smooth as we possibly could.
Oh man, we were part of the transition to the new, platform that you guys went through.
Oh, yes.
What was it? December of 22 going into 23?
I think so.
Oh,
yes. It was great.
I'm sure it was super fun on your side too. On our side, it was because we started our Catalyst Grant program prior to that transition. And so I think our application and stuff went through the old system. And then by the time we were ready to file for our first reimbursement, we were on the new one. Like, it was just so much fun.
Yeah, it was great. Love you, Iowa Grants.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Okay. So when did you grew up not necessarily in a small town.
No.
Your husband did, though.
He did, yes.
And then you moved to not really a small town in Iowa.
Nope.
But it sounds like you got your first dip into rural in Florida.
I did, yes.
Okay, so tell me about that.
And I will say both my parents came from small towns in Illinois, actually not too far from where my husband grew up. My husband actually at one point worked for my grandfather, who managed a John Deere dealership in Illinois. So it's a small world.
Super small.
And because of today's world, on our first date, I knew a lot of this background, and he didn't want to tell me he worked for John Deere. I don't remember why. He said that like some girls he had dated acted weird about that. So he avoided it. And I was like, in the back of my head, I was like, dude, you've got to say this because I have like real connections to Deere. Like I have John Deere things in my apartment. Like I'm a fan. Anyway, that sounds creepy. So I kind of had a tie to small towns for a while. Like every summer we go back to, my grandparents' house, both of them, in their two small towns in Illinois, and enjoy the whole small town life. So even though I grew up in Tampa, which is definitely not rural, always kind of had a love for smaller towns. When I worked for the state of Florida, I managed a program called Competitive Florida, which I still think is a super cool program. It's essentially where you work with a rural community, and kind of the front part of your relationship with that community, if you will, is to host a 2-day event where I would have coordinated about a team of between 10 and 15 like state partners to come to this community, break into teams and tour assets in that community, everything from hospitals to downtown businesses to an airport to factories, kind of see how things are working, and then spend a second day kind of doing a deep dive into maybe recommendations, next steps, resources that are available. And then all of the partners go home, and I go and would have created a report of kind of, this is what we saw, this is what we heard, this is what we recommend, and here are all the resources that you should consider. And then there was funding. If that sounds familiar, Boost is a little bit of that thought process. So Boost is the new rural program here. And I just loved Competitive Florida so much, and loved that kind of concept of bringing in these outside eyes who maybe have resources that the community's not even aware of, to just work with them and meet with them and talk about what's working, what's not. Also, it's just super cool. Like, getting to know your state is very fun. And I'm very grateful that in all 3 of my roles here, I've been able to do that. Because every community, like you said, has its own thing, and it's really fun to get to figure out like what that thing is and what they're super proud of. So Competitive Florida kind of laid my foundation for working with rural. I will say rural communities in Florida, though, tended to be pretty different from rural communities in Iowa.
So that was going to be my next question. So like, tell me about that. Like what made it so different? I'm not going to ask you which one you like better, because I don't want to put you on the spot like that.
Oh, it'll be very obvious. I mean, I did love some of the Florida communities, and the people who reached, I mean, it's not like we showed up in a community and we were like, you look like you need help. So clearly it was an application process. And competitive, like we had quite a few applications, and I think we only took 2 or 3 a year because that's all we could manage. But we found that Florida communities, there was a very much more vocal negative voice in almost every community we went in. So while the people who had applied and were wanting to move the community forward, Florida had a lot more naysayers, at least in most of the communities I worked in, which was just interesting. I know that those people exist in Iowa too. I don't know if it's Iowa nice that just keeps them from attending a lot of the meetings or gatherings or things that I've been associated with. But I do feel like it's a personality thing, because I almost feel like that's why Like we were first in the nation, like, wannabe presidents come here and talk to us. And a lot of times when that happens at like the fair, you don't get people just screaming at them that they disagree. That's just like not in the like makeup of Iowans to do that. It's like, well, let them say their piece, even if I don't agree. There were some people in Florida who didn't have that mentality. They were a little more on the scream now, ask later. So it was very different because I don't love conflict. I'm an Enneagram 9. It's very much part of who I am. Don't like conflict.
I'm an 8, so I'm like your
okay. I'm surrounded by 8s, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm married. I think my 3 best friends are all 8s. So I don't like conflict. I don't handle that well. So in some ways, I'm like, I was made to be in Iowa because, like, in general, people here are nice and they will listen even if they disagree. So it's just been a much healthier situation for me. Which is maybe why we're now going on year 8.
Yeah, instead of year 2.
Yes.
Okay, so then when did you just kind of carry that over then? You had started working in, rural Florida. You guys move up here. You're like, oh, I really enjoyed, working in small towns. Maybe not completely enjoyed working in small towns in Florida, but, I'm really interested in checking out these small towns in Iowa. Like was it just your role as you moved into the Empower Rural Iowa? Like, what was it that set you on the path to be like, rural Iowa was pretty cool too?
It definitely started in Florida. So I don't remember growing up and thinking like small towns are cool. It was more like they exist. I was aware of their existence, but we didn't like, make intentional pit stops in rural communities that I remember, and like check them out. But when I had my job in Florida, that was kind of part of it. Like I had to know all the assets of the communities we were working in. So that meant, the good, the bad, the ugly, and soon found out that there's some really cool parts of Florida and some really undiscovered parts of Florida, which is getting harder and harder to find. So then when I came to Iowa, I managed the Iowa Great Places program, and then kind of revived their cultural and entertainment districts. But Great Places, it had been around for, I want to say maybe 10 years when I started, and needed kind of a refresh. So I did a tour of Great Places. I can't remember right now how many there were at the time, but I want to say I must have gone to like 25 or 30 different communities around the state. And it will shock you to know that I was mostly rural. So
Weird.
Who would have thought? So while a couple of the Great Places are urban, most of them were rural. So most of my visits were in rural areas. And all, 4 corners of the state. So I really kind of very quickly got a tour of Iowa within just even a few months. And just very quickly kind of fell in love with it. And like the variety of everything from basic topography to, culture or personality, things like that. So I'd say it started because of the job probably, but I feel like now we've probably only done it 4 times, but I am slowly getting my husband to go to all of these communities too. So we're doing like little weekend vacations in town so that we can explore. Also, usually I'm working, so I stop at like the local coffee shop always, but I rarely get a chance to like bebop the store. So it's super fun for me to go without an agenda, just get to explore these other rural towns, but
to have the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then, and I asked Bill this as well. What do you define as rural?
We often, I don't actually remember what Bill said. I did listen.
That's good. I'm glad that you don't.
So I'm going to say like the royal we go with letting the community decide if they identify as rural. So for Empower, it was 10,000 and under for all of our grants. And that worked pretty well. But we had a couple communities that were maybe slightly larger than that. Was it 10,000 under? Am I already forgetting? Was it 20,000 and under? It might be 20,000 and under.
It seems like it's 20.
Okay, 20,000 and under. So maybe my answer is 10,000 and under.
Same.
Because there were a few communities over 20,000 that were like, we're rural. And I'm like, but are you?
Yeah.
Like, once you have multiple staff members who work for your city, who are able to help with things like grant management and like even thinking about things like placemaking activities and things like that, I feel like you're in a different echelon. Whereas most of our most rural communities, so we'll go with 10,000 and under, even 5,000 and under, they have a city clerk. And they are not thinking much about placemaking unless it's like a real personal passion. They just don't have the capacity. So typically in those communities, it's someone else who's thinking about those quality of life pieces and making it happen. It's, other nonprofits or just random group. One of my favorite groups are I think it's the Leading Ladies of Lenox in Lenox, Iowa. And it's just a group
Love the alliteration.
Yes. It's like a group of, I think they're mostly retired women, and they are just like slowly piecemealing, doing little projects to improve their downtown. They received a couple of grants. I think they were able to funnel their grants through either the city or another nonprofit. So they're not even like an established thing. They're just people who care about their town and want to get things done.
Right.
I'm like, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
I kind of answered your question, maybe.
You did. Do you want to know Bill's answer?
Yes.
He said, you'll know it when you see it.
Oh, there we go. That sounds very Bill.
It does sound very Bill, doesn't it? It definitely does. Okay. I like that. I like that you're convincing your husband that you need to take these little road trips so that you understand and you see. Mm-hmm. What are some of your favorite things that you're seeing rural communities do? Like, do you feel like general trajectory of rural Iowa, do you feel like it's on an upward trend, or do you feel like it's a downward trend?
I don't know if I'm going to answer your question, but at some point I really wanted to talk about leadership. So I'm just going to kind of talking about here.
Yeah.
So leadership has slowly become something that I'm super passionate about, because I feel like I have noticed that is the difference in the communities that are making it and the communities that are not. And it doesn't have to be your traditional leader of, your mayor, your city council. It's great if they're on board too. But if they're not, it doesn't have to be. But just communities that have, I'd say at least one, but it's helpful if there's more leaders on board, are the ones that are actually kind of seeing movement in the upward trajectory, if you will. That doesn't necessarily mean, in my mind, more population. It just means kind of a vibrant community where you can drive through and you're like, oh, people care about their place here. Like, they are proud to be here. They, maybe take care of their property. There's like little, again, pieces of joy around where you're like, this is a cool place to be. People are happy to be here. And it doesn't seem to be based on population at all. Like, I'm sure you maybe have been sick of hearing examples of Stanton, Iowa.
I've heard a lot.
Yeah, they are kind of like they kind of remind me of like the little train that could. They're like the little town that could. Mm-hmm. 'Cause when you talk to them, when you see the projects that they've done, when you even drive through their downtown now, you're surprised by their size. Manning is that way to me too. When you drive through Manning, and then you compare it to other communities of the same size, it's like, can be very much like, what is happening here that this is able to work? And it's just leadership. It's just getting the right people at the helm it's sometimes money, but it's also leadership. Getting the right people at the table who are able to kind of put the pieces together, work together, and just slowly do little projects that make a difference.
Right. And it doesn't have to be, like you said, a big project. Mm-mm. It can be flowers.
Yes.
On your main street. It can be a fresh coat of paint. It can be, like you said, even just the basics of taking care of your property so that it doesn't look like it's either a junkyard or falling down.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You may have heard Bancroft talk about this at the Rural Summit, but they were like, we apparently have really clean windows. And like, we didn't notice it, but we have someone who cleans the windows. It's like, well, yeah, little things like that just show that you care.
Right. And I actually wrote that down as a now owner of some giant windows that are high. I was like, oh, that is a good idea. As maybe a Main Street thing. Mm-hmm. Like, we just pay $25 a month to have a local window cleaner just come and get everybody's.
Yes.
Great.
I love that.
Easy. Like I said, as someone with the owner of very large, very tall windows, somebody else do it, please.
Yes.
It is a little thing that, you wouldn't notice day to day, but it's a first impression.
Yes.
So I think that's important. Okay. So talk to me a little bit about how you got involved in the IRDC. I'm guessing that it just was a natural fit. You maybe were a groupie, or
I was a groupie.
They were maybe more willing to let you in early.
That's an excellent question. I can't remember when it initially started, but it was very early to me moving to Iowa. I actually went to the first Rural Summit that they kind of kicked off again. That was in Jefferson. It was only one day. I think they invited my boss, and he was like, I don't know why I'm invited to this. Like, why do they need the Arts Council for this economic development thing? And he's like, so can you come too? So I was like his plus one essentially. And we didn't really know what we were getting into, but that was like right up my lane, because I was very much like, oh, I want to meet other people, talk about what we have going on, which again, I'm a little bit of an introvert. So it's very funny that I've like put this upon myself as being something I have to do. So we went to Jefferson, and that was that first fall that I had moved. It was like 2016 in the fall. I must have just started, maybe I met Bill there. I don't remember. But then I started attending their quarterly meetings, which used to just be around a board room table at Farm Bureau, and then slowly have grown to have to be stadium seating also still in Farm Bureau, but Farm Bureau room, because we can't fit around a board table anymore. Because as you know, Rural Development Council is not pay to play. So essentially, if you want to join, you want to come to the quarterly meetings, you are more than welcome to attend, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I think it is as well. And it's, again, if you're looking at people who care about rural, if you're not associated with a larger organization, like, you can't pay to play,
right?
It's not, the funds aren't there. Mm-hmm. The tax base isn't there to, make it, but that doesn't mean that what you can contribute is not valuable. So I think that is a good way to make sure you're including the people that you're attempting to serve. Mm-hmm. So I very much appreciate that as well. So then talk to me a little bit about your new role at UNI.
Yes. So I'm with UNI Institute for Decision Making, as you said. Essentially, that's just like I've heard them say it's an academic term. We're essentially economic development is kind of our thing. I believe we're a team of 7 now. So can I count? 4 of us. I was going to say 3, didn't count myself. 4 of us do more of the kind of community side, strategic planning, outward stuff. And then we have 2 that are more focused on kind of research, kind of maybe workforce related, data related type research. And then we have the person that kind of keeps the trains on the track.
Somebody's got to do it.
Someone's got to do that. So I started working with the UNI team through my past role with Empower. So James Holscher was the chair of the GROW task force, which is the one that was looking at leadership development. And so got to know him pretty well right away as the chair of that, and saw him he very quickly helped facilitate a lot of things because it's in his blood. So he was very instrumental in creating the leadership exchange and what that was going to look like, what the leadership boot camp was going to look like. So while that all came from Empower, it was very much his brainchild as well, to kind of figure out all those moving pieces. And just always very impressed by him. I also got the opportunity to work with now my other colleagues, but his colleagues, Carla Organist and Drew Conrad, just in random work over the 4 years I was with Empower, and had so much respect for the stuff that they were doing. A lot of what they were doing were like some of the fun pieces that I was enjoying about my current role, without the stuff I was not really loving in my current role. So I'll say when the position came available to join their team, I wasn't looking for a new job. It wasn't like I was miserable working at IEDA and working for Empower. I still love Empower. I will probably forever be a groupie. And I'm super grateful that I get to, in this current role, continue my work with like the Rural Development Council and the new Rural Vitality Coalition and some of those pieces, because I love that stuff. I was a little bit just kind of looking for a change. Grant management isn't my favorite thing in the world. And I was doing a lot more of it than I thought. And I had found that I was starting to bring pieces into Empower that were essentially the things that Institute for Decision Making does, like creating Boost and creating strategic plans for communities. It's like, oh, hey, there's this whole organization that's just what they do. Maybe you should be part of that team. And with my planning background, it's kind of a natural fit. So it's been really fun to join them. I will say my biggest fear joining them, I was like, oh, I'm joining all these people who have all this experience and knowledge, and like, what am I bringing to the table? I have a couple different skill sets that I am able to contribute. So I haven't felt like it's been a total loss for them. Hopefully they don't think so. None of them are actual planner background. So me being involved with the American Planning Association Iowa chapter, I'm their communications chair. Yay. With a zero communications background. It's fine. It's fine. But I'm involved, have kind of kept my toe in the planning world the whole time. So working with that network, and they are obviously very deep in the economic development world, both nationally and within Iowa. So we're able to maybe start marrying some of these groups together that have a lot in common and are kind of working in their silos right now.
Yeah. So speaking of that planning, if you are in a rural community, as we define it, however you would like to interpret our definition.
When you see it.
Yes, when you see it, as Bill would say. Where would you, so I'm a city clerk, I'm a mayor, I'm a leading lady of Lennox, attempting to say, hey, what's the next step for our community? You know, where would you send them first? Like, what's a resource that you think is just underutilized, underappreciated, perhaps, lesser known for these communities? Because I think oftentimes, you know, the lieutenant governor, he had said, you know, I have all of this money, I have all of these things, I just need people to know about it. Mm-hmm. Where do you send them? Like, where's the first place you send them to not overwhelm them? Because that's the other thing.
Right.
Like, you can send them to this website and be like, here's all of these things that you can do. But is there a resource out there that they can tap into that is, okay, here's what we have. Here's where I think we could make some impact. And if not, there's an idea for the next council you need to start.
A couple things. Usually I had them join Bill's listserv, which in some ways can be overwhelming, but it's also a very easy way to get plugged in. So that's kind of been my go-to for like just a catch-all for everything, because he posts about everything. If we're kind of starting at the beginning, and we're talking like pretty small communities, so at least maybe 5,000 and under, would probably recommend Boost as a program to get started. It's new, but it's a good starting point, because the whole point is to kind of get that community plugged in. So it's to have we don't bring 15 people, they bring like 5 people in to just kind of talk with the community leaders, hear what's going on, hear what's working, hear what's not, maybe hear what their goals are, and then try to identify some people, other communities as examples, or funding resources that might be a good fit. So, I mean, I'm partial, but I like Boost for that. For straight up resources, right now, I think it's back on the website. Empower Iowa has a PDF of like resources. I think it's called Rural Resources Document. You have to like scroll all the way to the bottom of the page and it's linked there. It's just a PDF. I have a dream that has been stewing since 2019 to have on the Rural Development Council website a searchable engine. So you could type in like downtown housing, or maybe just housing, and resources, best practices, what have you, would populate. It's been one of those projects where there's a few of us that have been working on it, but it's always back burner. Rural Vitality now has someone who it's her front burner to get this done. Perfect. So I'm actually meeting with her tomorrow to talk about kind of first steps. So I think stay tuned, because she's a go-getter, and now that it's on her front burner, I'm thinking it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah. If you can put it on somebody's front burner, it
makes all the world of a difference.
It definitely does. But like you said, it's just, there's so many programs, there's so many opportunities, there's so many different things. It's just trying to figure out how not to shove it on somebody's plate that already has more than they can.
I know.
But you also don't want to lose the allocation, lose the program, lose the whatever. And so I understand where, if that's how it still has to exist.
It was literally like Bill, someone from UNI, someone else from IEDA, myself. We would all meet about every 4 months. And we were like, yeah, we should definitely do this. And then in 4 months, we were like, so what were we supposed to be doing? Like who had the ball in their court? Like, don't remember. So I'm really excited about that. I also, and to kind of get back to your planning question, I feel like I have to mention that having a plan is kind of important. So even for the small communities, to figure out a way to get a plan is an important step, because for a lot of different reasons, not least of which is that funders really like if a project is tied to a plan rather than it's just, I think this is a great idea.
Yes.
So there's that. But then there's also just, if you do the planning right, you get community buy-in, and then the community's excited. So then if the city has to spend money on it or someone else is spending money on it, it's a little bit more of a, well, we all agreed that this was the direction we were going. So it's a little bit more okay. So I am a big fan of planning, whether that's a full-on strategic plan, which is kind of the bread and butter of what I'm doing now, which is a longer process, multi-month process. Or I am trained as a strategic doing facilitator, which is a process that is more focused on doing than planning. So it brings a group together for a couple hours. I think it's like 4 hours is actually our process. You start with this big goal and you whittle it down to specific tasks. And then you meet up again in 30 days and make sure everyone did their homework. And then you determine what next steps need to happen. And then you meet again in 30 days. So it's a heavy-ish lift for the facilitator, but it's great for communities who need a couple quick wins. So every once in a while we run into communities that are just like so overwhelmed and all the projects seem so big. That something like strategic doing might be a good fit to just be like, look, a few easy steps and look at what you did. Or communities that have what I call planning paralysis, where they've just like done all the plans. It's like, we have a strategic plan, we have a greenways plan, we have a bike plan, we have a downtown plan. And they're just not doing anything. For those kind of communities, it's a good fit too. Cause it's like, okay, it's time to do, guys. Like, let's get it done.
Yes.
So that's another kind of option for communities, depending on where they are at in their process.
Right. And that's, I would definitely be more of a doing person. I generally have a plan, and generally I try to communicate it and get people on board. But I am definitely a big fan of like getting a small win. Mm-hmm. Small win, get some momentum. And then you start to convince people that, oh, okay, yes, we did this. What else can we do? And sometimes that's all it takes. So as you look forward at your new role I know you are not part of Empower Rural Iowa necessarily formally anymore.
So weird. So weird.
But it still feels like you are. And I have a feeling that you're still just going to be involved, even if it's just groupie level, whatever. As you look forward in the next 12 months or so, like, is there something that you're really excited about, like a new project that you're excited about? Maybe it's just getting settled into your new role and figuring out what that looks like.
I feel like leadership is kind of on everyone's minds right now. And something is going to happen in the next 12 months. So I mentioned that we have the leadership exchange and boot camp. I wouldn't say I stole it. It was in the works, but it's one of those programs that Empower has kind of handed off, and they've handed it off to the Rural Development Council, and I volunteered to be in charge of the events committee, which is hosting it. So essentially I didn't drop that ball off my plate. But it's a program that I really love, and Empower is still a partner in it. So we're kind of doing it together.
I told you weren't getting away.
I know. It's so hard. It's so hard. So that has been going really well. That program is designed, it was originally designed for leadership program managers to convene and kind of chat with each other about what's working, what's not, what are the challenges, yada, yada, because there are a lot of existing leadership programs. We actually we didn't steal it, they gave it to us from the ABI Foundation. They used to do something very similar and they just ran out of capacity, so it had gone dormant. So they essentially handed us their old agenda and was like, here, this was super popular, we just can't do it. And last year, ABI Foundation, specifically Leadership Iowa, was a partner with the program again. So we were trying to make it more statewide and not even just rural, because more or less leadership programs are leadership programs. So we have that, and Rural Development Council is taking that over this year. We'll be announcing soon where it's going to be in the fall. But there are other key players statewide that are getting really interested in leadership in a few different ways, mostly in, one group is looking at how to teach civility training, soft skills training, and what that could look like when embedded in existing training programs. So they applied for a grant. They're hoping they'll get it. And if they do, they might be coming up with some new things. And then Alliance kind of teased at the Rural Summit that they sponsor, I think they're a sponsor of the Rural Development Council is the correct term, with the purpose of their sponsorship to be towards leadership. And they're also interested in kind of developing a new kind of leadership, maybe something regional. It's very much in the works. But I just think leadership is one of those things that it is kind of hard to teach, but I think you can teach those soft skills. And I think it's important. And I feel like there's kind of two ways. I think we can identify new leaders, like people who are not involved at all, but maybe have a passion you just haven't tapped into yet and could be a really strong local leader if they are just asked and pulled into the fold. But then I also think that some of our elected officials could benefit from some basic soft skills training to be nice. But so often, and we expect them to just suddenly have all of these skills to be able to handle dispute resolution and all of these challenges, even kind of thinking visionary. A lot of times people get elected either because no one else wanted the position, they were talked into it, or they have a pet project and that's really all they want. But given the potential and maybe a few additional skills, we could have some maybe different type of city councils or county governments.
Yeah.
Which hope none of this gets me into trouble. It's really nothing that we don't all already know.
Right. Well, and it's like you said, a little bit of training can go a long ways, and you don't know the ripple effect that one leader who has maybe potentially more soft skills than the rest in the room, it can inspire some other things. You just you're limited on resources, and so trying to figure out what way to maximize those resources and have a knock-on effect and a catalyst for change or whatever. Yeah, I think one leader can make all the difference. So, and yes, not everyone is born with those soft skills, nor we'll leave it at that. Not get anybody in trouble in general, but let's just say that there's some city council meetings that can get Western. Yes, it would be the best way that I can describe it, and it's not always productive, in the grand scheme of things, and I don't think necessarily helps with community cohesion and everything else that you want a city council to do.
It is such a bummer to go into communities where maybe I don't know, maybe there's a local business that's doing some really great things, or maybe there's a nonprofit there. And then all you hear is, oh, but we don't really work with the city council because they don't want to work with us. And it's if we could only get you all rowing in the same direction, right? Imagine the impact that would make.
Yes. Or even what came up at the Rural Development Council or the Rural Development Summit, talking about the turnover of city councils too, where you have one in that is forward thinking, that's visionary, that is economic development minded, only to go through another election cycle and for that to turn over and not be the case. And then the challenges that go with that. And I think a outside conversation could potentially assist in some of those transitions, but Anyways, so leadership is the big thing.
That
big
is.
theme
It's
of
kind
the
of
next 12 months.
Yes, it's top of my mind, and I feel like it's top on a couple people's minds, and I feel like something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Something.
That's cool. I like leadership things. So as you look at rural development, planning, all of that stuff in Iowa or in general, what do you think is the easiest low-hanging fruit for people? Like what's a small win?
Washing your windows. I mean, it really can be something that simple. I actually really like I don't know details, but just what I've heard on the surface of the new First Impressions program. I think there's a lot of value in having outside eyes come and kind of see what jumps out at them because you might not even realize it. So washing windows, I mean, clean coat of paint from a, like, if we're talking a building owner's perspective, that's great. For cities, we talk to them a lot about enforcing the codes you have before you create new ones. So we kind of would put that, I don't know if that's probably not a win, but it's a good starting point as something to do. You know, it could go a lot of ways. I feel like things like a bench or two, if your main street doesn't have any place to like sit down, even just adding a bench can add just a little bit of like, we want you to linger here. Like this is a place for you to enjoy. Flowers are hard, but there are other ways to add. I mean, even banners can be nice. You know, and you can probably now tell, I'm a big fan of like quality of life placemaking. I might be overused, but like kind of that concept of creating places where you just enjoy being. And when you're there, you are comfortable, you feel like you are welcomed. And that can literally be as simple as just like, oh, cool. This place like cares about where they are. I'm in Collins because the banners all say that.
I am aware of where I'm located.
Yes. And there's a bench. I could go sit down. And it might sound silly, but just some of those little things can make a big difference. And we have seen some communities who do very piecemeal streetscaping projects where they will maybe get businesses to sponsor individual light poles if their light poles need to be replaced. A lot of communities do if you want to do planters, where the businesses sponsor the planters and are responsible for upkeep.
I am the planter lady.
Are you the planter lady?
I'm the planter lady. I've inherited it, which is fine.
It's like a full-time job sometimes.
No, we only have 7. We only have 7
Okay.
here on Main Street, and I'll do petunias because I love petunias, and that's what it's been in the past anyways. But so yeah, there was a ladies like garden club, and all of the members have either passed away or moved on, and so I said I would take it over. We have a landscaping business. Kind of makes sense.
That is a fairly natural fit.
Yes. We live right on Main Street. So like it was definitely a natural fit. And I always plant petunias, like have petunia hanging baskets and all that on my building and my processing plant. So I was like, oh, we'll just add it to the list of, every other day watering. So no big deal.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well,
That's great.
It's just, it's a small thing.
Yes.
That really does just add, like you come to Main Street and you're like, oh, there's these beautiful flowers. There's this color, it doesn't take much. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It's not, it's a little bit of effort, but so what? It's one of those things that makes it look nicer.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Okay. So if people want to, call on the resources of IRDC, of UNI Institute for Decision Making, etc., where should they go?
I mean, you can email me. That's probably the best way to reach me. I know that you have so many businesses on here, so you have all of their Facebook and Instagram.
Which
I do have an Instagram.
I was going to say we can shout out your Talk Rural Iowa.
Yes. So, but that is totally just a pet project that I don't really take seriously, but I love. So I've mentioned I like to travel, and I have had taken all of these pictures of things in all of these rural communities, and just decided to start a Instagram account on that. So you probably sounds like you know the title of it more than I do.
I'm pretty sure it's Talk Rural Iowa, but now
Okay.
you're making me
It's something
question
like
myself.
that. I think it is. Let's talk rural
Let's
Iowa.
talk rural. You're right.
Yes.
Yes.
So I just put on there pictures that I've taken, and then I include, so I'm starting to try if it's a business, because I used to just do the town and the county and the population. I'm starting now to make sure I also tag the business or name the business. If anyone has any ideas or things you would like to have be included, let me know. It's mostly just fun. But it's been a cool way for me to document my travels around the state.
Yeah.
Which Collins will be showing up now very soon.
Beautiful.
But yeah.
But yeah, it's Let's Talk Rural Iowa, and there's periods between each of the words
Yes.
in the actual handle, and it has a whole bunch, highlights a bunch of gems, I would say, and it's literally around the state because that's where you went. So yeah, check it out, and otherwise drop you an email.
Yes. Drop me an email. Or find me, being a groupie at the Rural Development Council meetings or Empower meetings.
Yeah. She'll be the one lurking in the back.
Yeah.
Trying be
Maybe in a pink shirt, because that tends to be my thing lately.
There you go. Well, is there anything else that you would like to leave everybody with? Words of advice, words of encouragement? Nothing?
I just say, keep on loving your place. I mean, this podcast and listening to the episodes made me really want to come to Collins because you interviewed quite a few people here, and I was like, I can't wait to get there. So just like little things, talking up your towns, not bashing it. So all of our communities, every single community has places they can do to improve, but they also have a lot of strengths. So I'd say lean into that piece, and that'll make all the difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you for making the trip here and taking the time to sit down and share.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.